Hello. Welcome to Section 2 of Chapter 36 on the Cold War from the American Pageant for U.S. History. Today we're going to talk about Truman, the gutty man from Missouri, all the way through the problem with Germany. So we're looking at the Cold War. The last one was a little bit about the economy and the baby boom and all that. We're going to actually get into the Cold War today and talk about President Truman a little bit. Truman was the first president in several years who did not have a college degree. He's just a normal guy, very plain spoken. He's from Missouri. He's very honest. He's very straightforward. On his desk, he used to have a sign that said, "The buck stops here." Back then, when you didn't want to do something, you passed the buck. You would say, "Hey, boss said you need to take out the garbage." And then the next guy would go to the lower guy, "Hey, the boss says you need to take out the garbage." By doing that, that's passing the buck. Truman used to say the buck stops with him. Like, I'll take care of it. I'll handle the problem. So he was known as an average man's average man. Okay. He had ability to face difficulty with courage. He was a very strong leader. He's not as charismatic and charming as Roosevelt was. He's definitely not that, but he's just straightforward, honest, hardworking, and he's really a good man for the start of the Cold War. And there's my little story about the buck stops here. There is a sign. I've been to the Presidential Library in Independence, Missouri, where he grew up, where he's from, and they have a recreation in the Oval Office, and that sign's there. So, the Soviets, the Cold War, it's kind of weird when you think. I mean, they were on the same team trying to defeat the Nazis, and then you remove the Nazis, and suddenly the Soviets and the United States don't really like each other. The seeds of the Cold War were sown during World War II. There was a lot of distrust between Stalin and Churchill and Roosevelt because Churchill and Roosevelt were buddies. They would plan things, and when they worked together on the nuclear bomb, they delayed the invasion of D-Day by a full year. And it really upset Stalin. He felt like they were out to get him. Long before he was anti-Nazi, Churchill was very anti-communist. He couldn't stand communists. And so Churchill and Stalin didn't trust each other. And so Roosevelt and Churchill met a lot, and so Stalin felt left out. But Stalin was unwilling to leave the Soviet Union. So finally, in February 1945, the Big Three met in Yalta. The furthest they could get him was to go to Iran. To discuss the post-war era. And so they meet there, and you have the three, and they sit down, and they have these meetings, and they have these dinners, and they have these all-night dinner parties. Stalin would throw these parties, and they wouldn't start eating until like midnight, and they'd drink all night. Churchill loved it, but Roosevelt, his health was failing him, so it didn't work well for him. So at this agreement, they decided a bunch of things. So in 1945, the war is still going in Europe. Each leader kind of has some issues they want to ensure. Roosevelt is just obsessed. He's scared that this war with Japan is going to keep going and going and going. This is before the nuclear bomb was finished, the atomic bomb. And so it was agreed upon the Soviets would fight Japan in Asia. I mean, the Soviet Union is so big it borders Korea and China, and it's over there by Japan. And in return, they would get some territory. It was kind of agreed that the Soviet Union would control Eastern Europe as a buffer zone to protect them from any possible German invasion, but they would hold elections in that area. They would allow elections in Poland, Bulgaria, and Romania. And then Germany would be divided into 4 zones with elections to be held on how to kind of run it. Stalin's biggest fear was a united, armed Germany. He was obsessed with that. I mean, twice in his lifetime, Germany had invaded his nation or fought his nation, the Soviet Union / Russia or Georgia, and inflicted millions of deaths. And so that's his big thing. Churchill, he just wants to make sure that Britain's taken care of, wants to make sure that elections are there and people have a voice in government, and communism isn't just spreading like a new form of fascism. And then they all agree to form a new worldwide peacekeeping organization called the United Nations. And so they agree on this, and they shake hands, and they write it down, but they don't sign anything. It's not an official agreement. They basically say, hey, once Hitler's defeated and the war's over in Europe, we'll meet again in Germany, we'll finalize everything, and we'll figure this out. It wasn't a binding agreement. It was kind of like a handshake thing. Both Stalin and Churchill noted that FDR looked terrible. His health was failing. He looked pale. He looked gaunt. He did not look like himself. And so they were worried about him, and they rightfully so. He unfortunately died 2 months after this. So fast forward a little bit, and you have them meeting in Potsdam, and Roosevelt's not there. So if we look at the two sides, you have the United States and the Soviet Union. Capitalism and communism are opposed to each other. Under the Karl Marx doctrine, the workers of the world would unite and in a bloody revolution destroy capitalism. They would set up socialism, and then eventually socialism would morph into communism. Once the government was no longer needed, the people would just live in harmony and share everything, and everybody would be equal. And that was Karl Marx's theory. And so, if you look at it, it's capitalism and communism are economic systems. In terms of a government, capitalism goes hand in hand with democracy. Communism, in its true form, should be more democratic, but the Soviet Union had a dictatorship. Even though he's not a dictator, he's a generalissimo, and they're still playing the game. He's the absolute totalitarian leader of the Soviet Union. The thing that really sparks people, that got people in America going, was communism did not believe in religion. Karl Marx said that religion was the opiate of the masses, that it soothed them, that it was just a drug for them to kind of take away their problems. And so the Soviet Union banned religion. Christianity, Islam, Judaism was all banned. They used churches to store potatoes for decades. I mean, they bulldozed over and demolished mosques. And so in America, communism was so bad because it was going to destroy their way of life, but it was also anti-God. In the 1950s, you have this strong conservative swing in this country in which people become more and more religious. In fact, under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance during the 1950s. The original Pledge of Allegiance does not have under God. And so some of the things that led to this distrust, besides the fundamental differences between communism and capitalism and all that stuff, is the US and Britain delaying their opening of the Second Front by a year. The Soviets were being slaughtered. Just to remind you that, the Soviet Union every 3 months was losing more men than the United States did in all of its wars combined. The United States terminated the USSR's Lend-Lease agreement early before the war was over in 1945. It also ignored Moscow's plea for a $6 billion reconstruction loan, so they didn't help out as much as they should. They also, in the next turn, approved a $3.75 billion loan to Britain to rebuild them. And so, like we were playing favorites, the United States was with Britain and not really helping out the Soviet Union. So the Soviets want a guarantee its own security. They want their own sphere of influence. Like I said, Stalin was paranoid. He probably has some paranoid personality disorders going on. He was paranoid that the Germans would be reunited and invade his country again. So he'll do anything possible to protect the Soviet Union from that. This contradicts Roosevelt and his Wilsonian dream of an open world that was decolonized, demilitarized, democratized. That's hard to say. The U.S. thought that they were trying to spread communism, that this was a new form of fascism, that it was growing like a cancer. And so you got basically this big misunderstanding that communism is trying to take over the globe, whereas Stalin just sees that he's trying to protect his own country. Each country believed that they had the universal expanse of its own form of government. They thought that countries should be like them. They should be created in their own image. Stalin at Potsdam began to take back many of the provinces from Yalta. Truman's there, and then halfway through the conference, his party's voted out of office, and so Clement Attlee is the guy who takes over, and neither one was at Yalta, and so Stalin tries to dominate the conference and tries to take back a lot of the promises. Truman, to give him credit for being a new president, didn't back down. He knew what the agreements were, and he stood up to Stalin, and it kind of sets the stage, sets the table for the Cold War. And so this is the beginning. These are the seeds of the 40 or 50-year standoff known as the Cold War. And it's called that because it's a competition for colonies. It's a competition for everything across the globe, but they don't actually ever fight each other directly. So that's why it's called the Cold War. And this is the communist menace that was created from World War II and World War I. So the Bretton Woods Conference established the International Monetary Fund in 1944, and that's kind of a major step towards harmony in the world. It encouraged world trade by regulating currency rates, and so it was a little more normalized to do trade. It also creates the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, which the Soviets refused to participate in because the United States was the center of it. And then on April 25th, 1945, a new worldwide peacekeeping organization, the United Nations Conference, the United Nations was created. It was chartered by 50 nations in San Francisco. It had the big five powers that were permanent members of the Security Council. They could veto any decision. They included Britain, France, the United States, China, and the Soviet Union. Soviet Union's their voting is now Russia. So these are the permanent five. It's still this way to this day. The other 10 members of the Executive Council, the Security Council, they rotate amongst the other 200 so nations. They can veto any action the United Nations takes. The Senate overwhelmingly approved this new agreement, no hesitation. It wasn't like the League of Nations. It wasn't like Wilson. And so the United Nations was created in 1945 in San Francisco. Its permanent headquarters were set up in New York, donated on land by the Rockefellers. So Germany. At Nuremberg, Germany, from 45 to 46, the Nazi leaders were tried and punished for their war crimes, for what they did during the Holocaust and everything else. The punishments including hangings and long jail sentences. This is Hermann Göring, who killed himself in jail before he was hanged by the United States. The Americans, though, realized that a flourishing German economy was necessary for the recovery of Europe. To stop the spread of communism, you can't have people desperate, people starving, because the last time things were going that way, they turned to Hitler. And so the Soviets refused to support the development of Germany because they feared another German-initiated war. That was Stalin's biggest fear. The USSR wanted to take reparations from Germany, but Britain, France, and the United States are hesitant to do that because those reparations in World War I created the climate which led to the rise of Nazis and Hitler. So this is from the Nuremberg trials here, and most of these guys were put to death or committed suicide. Probably should for what they did. So they divided Germany into 4 zones. The United States got this southern zone, southeastern zone. USSR got the eastern zone here. The United Kingdom got the northwestern zone. And then France got the zone that bordered France. And then Berlin, if you look very closely here, was divided into 4 zones itself, totally within the Soviet zone. And so Stalin, like I've said many times, he feared a reunited Germany. He'll do anything to prevent an invasion of his nation and to prevent Germany from being reunited and having guns. But he takes back his promises. There's no elections held in Eastern Europe. Romania, Poland, Hungary, these places fall under the cloak of the Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain, as it's coined by Winston Churchill later on, and they become puppet governments. They become little communist governments that follow what the Soviet Union wants. Churchill coins the term the Iron Curtain in a speech in Fulton, Missouri, after he was out of prime minister at Westminster College, and so it becomes kind of symbolic of the Cold War. And so what happens is you get the Berlin blockade on June 7th, 1948. The United Kingdom, United States, and France announced that they're going to put their 3 zones together and form a new country called West Germany. And then they said, you know what, we might even give them guns. And the Soviets said, are you kidding me? Germany's back together and they're going to have guns? What is going on? And so on June 24th, just 21 days after this, I think that's my math right, I don't know. No, it's not. Sorry, 17 days after this, the Soviets cut off Berlin from the West. They basically surround it, and they basically hold Berlin hostage. This is the first showdown of the Cold War. And so this is kind of the division. Everything in red became a communist nation. The blue became democratic nations. And then, you have the Yugoslavia, who's communist, but they hate Stalin. And then the gray is neutral. They're just trying to figure things out. This is a political cartoon of the Iron Curtain. And then this is Churchill giving his speech in Fulton, Missouri, where he coined the term the Iron Curtain. So this is the division of Germany after the war, and then you can see what they did to Berlin here. So, the Berlin airlift. Truman has a decision. Does he back down? Does he let Berlin go to the Soviet Union? Does he attack? Does he start World War III? Truman does something truly ingenious. Instead of dropping bombs, planes flew round the clock for 10 months, dropping supplies. For the 2 million citizens that were cut off by this blockade. They dropped food, medical supplies, water, you name it. And it's ingenious because the Soviet Union shot down any of these planes. The United States had the provocation to go to war now. And at this time, the United States still has the ace in the hole. They're the only nation with the atomic bomb. And so Stalin is fully aware that if they do anything, they could be attacked with a nuclear bomb from the United States. This thing lasts 10 months. They fly around the clock, dropping supplies, landing sometimes, and giving supplies to the German citizens. It sent a message to Stalin that Truman, you can't mess with him. He's not going to back down. Maybe he's not as charming and charismatic as Roosevelt, but he's stubborn and he's hardworking. The blockade ends in May 1949. And basically, by the end of the year, by October 1949, you have 2 Germanys. You have East Germany, which is a Soviet nation, communist government, a puppet government. You have West Germany, which is allied with the United States, and it's formed in their image as very democratic. Here's another picture from 1948 in Berlin with the airlift. That's all I have for today. If you have any questions, let me know. We'll continue this later on.